RiverWatch is a citizen science organization that trains volunteers to monitor water quality in their own communities. The mission of RiverWatch is to safeguard the future of Illinois rivers and streams through stewardship, education, and sound science. If you are interested in becoming a citizen scientist, please consider coming to one of our spring workshops that will be held in person across Illinois. Registration is now open and workshops are starting to fill up, so sign up soon to reserve your spot. But before we get started, I ask that you keep your microphone muted during the presentation to limit the distractions. If you have a question along the way, you can either put it into the chat box and Katie can answer it at the end, or you can save it and ask it aloud during the Q&A session. And with that, I would like to welcome Katie Whitlow. Katie is currently a fifth-year PhD candidate of organismal biology and anatomy at the University of Chicago. Her thesis topic involves investigating the evolution and mechanics of cranial kinesis and suction generation in fishes. She is a founding board member and current secretary of the Chicago Undersea Explorers Society, and she is currently certified through Rescue Diver and is in the process of earning her Dive Master certification. Thank you for joining us this evening, Katie, and we look forward to learning about scuba diving.
Thanks, and thanks for inviting me to speak tonight. Let me just get my slides going here. Can you all see my slide presentation? Okay, great. All right, thanks for the introduction, Hannah. Today, I'm excited to tell you all about scuba diving, and in particular, some of the aquatic and marine science applications of diving done by myself and my lab mates, and some of the really cool places that you can actually go have underwater adventures, basically in your own backyard. So a little bit of background about me. As Hannah mentioned, my day job is as a scientist, and I'm currently working at the University of Chicago, earning a PhD in integrative biology and anatomy with my advisors, Mark Westneat and Callum Ross. I love doing fieldwork and teaching anatomy, which thankfully I've gotten to do both of those with my bosses while earning my degree. And I'll give you a little bit of introduction about my research background, as my research interests have really guided why I got into diving as well. I did my undergraduate at the Southern Illinois University of Edwardsville. And there I was able to do research on snail, foot, and shell morphology to inform our understanding of their hydrodynamics and ecological distribution. I did that work with Dr. Paul Brunkow, who actually gave a talk in the same speaker series in the fall. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go check it out. From there, I did my master's thesis at Towson University, where I studied knifefish. This is one of the species that I looked at here. And these fish have a really long ventral fin, and they sort of pass waves down it like a ribbon to swim. So we were really interested in understanding how that affected their performance in terms of how they got away from predators and the energetic costs of their swimming. As Hannah mentioned, I am now researching 3 species that we sort of consider fossil fishes. So these are groups that diverged really early from the rest of fish in their evolutionary history. Specifically, here you can see gar, bowfin, and bashirs are the 3 focal species for my thesis. And the really interesting thing about these fish is they have fewer mobile elements in their skull compared to other fishes. And so we're interested in understanding those linkages in their skull and how they're able to suction feed basically just as successfully as other fish who have more mobile elements in their skull. I was able to capture 2 of these species in Illinois in the Big Muddy River. So part of why I wanted to discuss this as well, because it's a local collecting trip that we were able to go on down by Carbondale. And what I'm doing with these fishes is a technique called X-ROM, where we animate the bones in the fish's skull. So here you can see an animation of one of my study species, bashirs. This little black sphere is actually a marker that's in the prey item that the fish is going to suck into its mouth. So we can also track exactly how that prey is moving during the suction feeding event, which is really cool. This technique also allows us to really precisely measure 3-dimensional motions of each of these bones and answer questions about how their joints are working. So I think with all of my talks so far about fishes, it's probably pretty obvious that my love of fish and water is a huge reason why I got into scuba. To me, the aquatic and marine worlds are one of the last great frontiers, and being able to explore and see a world that relatively few people will ever get to lay eyes on is just an incredibly cool experience. I also find the physics and science of diving to be really interesting. The fact that we're able to breathe underwater and access incredible depths is pretty amazing. But beyond that, and something that I didn't necessarily expect when I decided to get certified, is that there's an incredible community that comes along with diving. While historically it's a field that's been largely dominated by relatively privileged groups, lately I've been able to meet a lot of new faces coming in as well and becoming more prevalent in the diving community, including younger people, women, and people of color. And I've also met very few people in the diving community who haven't been just incredibly welcoming and supportive. You end up basically trusting the people that you're diving with your safety, and you end up really developing a quick bond with people because of that. And you also are bringing people together who just have a love of water and the ocean. So it can be just a really great thing on a personal level to develop friendships and communities as well. So how does the process of getting certified actually work? You can work with an individual instructor or a shop to get your certification. But one of the first things that you need to decide is what agency you might want to get certified through. In the US, there are two major certifying agencies: the National Association of Underwater Instructors, or NAUI, and the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, or PADI. These sound really similar, obviously, and they do offer very similar things in terms of what their certifications can give you. But there are a few differences in how they're structured that sort of end up affecting how their instructions actually work. So NAUI is a nonprofit organization. They're also the oldest US certifying agency, whereas PADI split off more recently and is a for-profit company. They also grew really rapidly, so they're now the world's largest certifying agency. So you might be able to find PADI a little bit more easily in your area, but I personally slightly prefer NAUI because they are a little bit more focused on like education and teaching things like rescue skills that are not necessarily covered in PADI courses. They offer a little bit more flexibility to their instructors. So if anything, their instructors tend to go above and beyond what's required for a basic certification. But as far as what you actually get from a certification from either of these agencies, they both offer international recognition. They have very similar policies regarding age and junior certifications for people who are 10 and up, but younger than 15. And they both offer, once you have completed an open water certification, the ability to dive to 60 feet with a similarly certified buddy. And for anyone here who's already a diver, but maybe interested in getting some more certifications under their belt, the requirements of the certification before I get into talking about advanced classes. You have to fill out a little bit of paperwork about your medical history, just to make sure that you don't have any conditions that might make it dangerous for you to scuba dive, and that if you do, you've discussed this with your doctor and made sure that it is safe for you to dive. You have to be able to complete a couple of swim tests as well. These can be different depending on which agency you're working with, but they're similar. So PADI requires a 200-meter swim with just goggles or a mask, whereas NAUI requires a 450-meter swim, but you can wear fins and use a snorkel for that swim as well. Both agencies require a float or tread for 10 minutes, and NAUI also requires an underwater swim of about 50 feet, or of exactly 50 feet. It's about 2/3 the length of a swimming pool, so it's not as difficult as it might sound. Basically, if you can sit at your desk and hold your breath for a minute, you can very easily complete this swim test. So the process of getting certified, once you have done the paperwork and you are confident that you can complete those swim tests, starts off with a knowledge development component. So this is essentially bookwork. You can get either a physical book or get e-learning. And this basically will cover physics of diving, basics of the equipment, things like hand signals and processes that you'll go through when you're actually executing a dive, and talk about dive safety. Once you've completed all of the book work, and I should note right now, NAUI e-learning is actually completely free due to the pandemic. They decided to open that up. So if you want to try some book work and see if you're interested in getting certified, you can go and make an account on NAUI's website and access their e-learning for no cost. So once you've done the book work, you take an exam, make sure that you understand all of the book work. You'll also discuss it with your instructor or your shop a little bit to make sure that everything makes sense to you. And then you'll go on to do some confined dives. These are in a pool or other shallow and clear water. It's typically about 5 dives across 3 or 4 sessions, but it can be really variable exactly what this entails depending on what instructor or shop you're working with. But essentially what you get out of this is learning how to assemble all of your gear, learning how the gear works and how you're going to use it when you're diving, learning hand signals that you would use with your group underwater, and then practicing skills. Skills are basically physical, like things that become muscle memory as you become a more comfortable diver. Things like clearing your mask of water, clearing your regulator, the breathing apparatus of water, and practicing buoyancy, so controlling your position in the water column. After you have become comfortable with all of these skills, you'll go to a series of open water or checkout dives. This is sort of like your practical exam where you go out in the real world and demonstrate to your instructor that you are competent and confident in your skills, and they can release you into the world and you're going to be a safe diver. So for anyone who has already gotten open water certified but might be interested in advanced certifications, there are a number of specialties, including things like photography, wreck diving, and night diving. Within these specialties are 2 that I think are extra useful and extra potentially important, especially the second one for people who live in the Midwest, and that's nitrox or enriched air nitrox diving. That enables more repetitive dives. So nitrogen accumulation in the body is what tends to cause decompression sickness, or what people call the bends. And by enriching your air supply with additional oxygen, you can reduce the risk of getting the bends over the course of repeated dives throughout a day. I don't want to get too far into the physics and physiology of what goes on with that, but if people have questions at the end, I'd be happy to talk about it. And then the second one is dry suit diver certifications. And I think this is especially helpful for people who live in the Midwest, where you might be trying to dive in cold water, as the name implies, enables you to stay dry while you're scuba diving. So you can go into colder water because you can wear layers of insulation. This is what people wear when they do things like ice diving. In addition to specialty certifications, you can also get what's called an advanced open water certification that enables you to dive to 120 or 130 feet, depending on the agency that you certify with. And this is the recreational diving limit. So that's as far as you can go without getting this final certification on the list, which is technical diving. And then the other one that I like to recommend to people is rescue diver. I think of all the classes that I've taken so far, that has been the one that has tested me the most, both physically and mentally. And it has made me a much more competent and confident diver, knowing that I could rescue someone twice my size if I had to do that, is just a really useful thing to have under your belt. It's quite a process. It's an intensive class, but if anyone wants to talk more about that at the end, I'd be happy to. And another track of certifications, the last one that I'll talk about today, is scientific diving. This is an intensive course, generally about 100 hours, training you in safety and skills for using scientific equipment underwater. The certifications are offered through the AAUS, American Academy of Underwater Sciences, and they're typically associated with institutions like the Smithsonian or universities. Scientific diving certification is a really good idea if you're going to be doing a lot of data collection underwater or using like really cumbersome equipment underwater. And I have some images here of some of my lab mates using their scientific diving certifications in the field. Here, Chloe is filming goatfish for behavioral observations and a microhabitat use study. So she studies goatfish that have these little barbells that they use to like dig around in the sand or in rocks for food. And she's interested in understanding if their habitat use, like whether they prefer more sandy or rocky substrate, is related to their morphology of those barbells. And then the other photos here are showing various GoPro setups that were actually left underwater for a period of time. So these were opportunistically filming fish that came through the arena. And typically they were also set up with a dive weight that had some shrimp on it. So they were encouraging basically competitive behaviors of the fish that they were observing for this part of the study. And the idea that they're planning on using these videos for is to study maneuverability, because they saw a lot of really quick turning and chasing behaviors from the fish in these studies. But the fun thing about the three-dimensional GoPro setup is it allows you to get three-dimensional kinematic data rather than just sort of like, okay, I know this fish is here or here. You can actually measure things like how fast it's moving. And this video is some people setting up an eel trap in Corsica. So that's the big device that they're carrying, is a trap. This was for a population study where they were taking counts and body measurements of whatever species they caught. You can see that location was marked by a little buoy that just disappeared on the left. So it's basically in a series of transects that they've set up around this field station. So they're also capturing spatial data about how the species are occupying the space around the field station. And this final video here is some researchers at Catalina Island who caught octopi for a thesis for a graduate student. And the thing that she was interested in was population studies as well as effects of predation by eels on these octopi. So not only is she measuring the body size of the octopi, but she's also measuring each arm, because apparently moray eels in particular will just sort of take a chunk out of the arm, and the octopi seem to handle it just fine. The device that she's recording data on here is called a dive slate. And then once they're done taking all those measurements, the octopus is free to go on its merry way. Scuba diving is also used for non-biological underwater sciences like geology, chemistry, and archaeology. I don't personally know quite as much about these, but I will talk a little bit about underwater archaeology at the end of the talk today. One skill that's really important for all of these different types of scientific diving is underwater mapping. This is basically where you are measuring the dimensions, depth, and orientation of structures that you find underwater. And it's important for helping people do things like lay out transects for those studies that we just saw. And while in essence, measuring things underwater sounds relatively simple, it requires a lot of multitasking and bringing in different equipment that you wouldn't normally be thinking about when you're diving. So it does require specialized training to be able to do this. And as I mentioned, I'll circle back to this later when we discuss shipwrecks towards the end of this talk. So with that, I want to get into a little bit of where people can go diving locally in the Midwest without having to go travel to an ocean, especially during a pandemic. Not traveling to the ocean might be convenient and necessary. So first up on the list is Meridian Springs. This is a common site for checkout dives. It's actually where I got my certification back in 2012 for open water. It's outfitted with platforms for doing skill checks, so you don't have to be like kneeling in the muck on the bottom of a quarry. And it's actually a bit of a destination dive because they have a lot of sunken objects that people can check out underwater. And they have some cool fish to look at, like paddlefish. And they play music underwater. So people can kind of go here and have a lot of fun with the diving as well. Here are some photos of what Meridian Springs looks like underwater. So this is one of those platforms that I was talking about in a class with an instructor checking if his divers are okay. Here is someone exploring the Boeing 737 that's sunk in the quarry here. Here is one of those elusive paddlefish I have yet to see one day, hopefully. And then this photo on the bottom is one that I actually took when I was getting my certifications here. This is a school bus that they put underwater that is basically visible right off of the dock that you use to get in to the water at one edge of the quarry. So there's tons of stuff. The place is just littered with cool things underwater to go explore. And on the surface, it's a beautiful area. It has a campground on site as well as some state parks nearby. And if you are coming from anywhere north of that, you'll likely pass through Metropolis, Illinois on the way there, which is the home of Superman. So that's another fun thing to go check out. Just across the river is Bonne Mines, Missouri. Bonne was once the largest world producer of ore, lead ore specifically. This mine operated for almost 100 years before they hit groundwater and flooded some of their caverns, at which point they decided to turn off the pumps completely, and it became a dive destination. Largely because the water there is extremely clear. You can get 100 feet of visibility, which is just absolutely incredible for freshwater diving, especially. On the surface, they also have a campground. They have a cool little museum that you can check out, as well as a couple of caves that are not completely flooded that people can explore. And underwater, it can be a little tricky to get photos here because of the lack of light. But I'm told that there are some really incredible things to see here. I haven't actually been to this dive site myself. These photos are all from some of my friends in queues. But this is my absolute favorite photo on the top left here. This cavern is actually above another cavern where people are diving below them. So you can see the bubbles of divers that are in the cave below where this photo was taken. So these bubbles are actually coming up through the ceiling and the floor of this cavern where the photo was taken. And a couple of cool things that you can see here related to low visibility or night diving are that people will wear a little tank light that basically just looks like a glow stick so that people won't run into you if the lights are turned off. And I should mention with this dive site, I have a couple of friends who are kind of crazy and really into cave diving. So they've gone on a bunch of trips to places like Mexico to go explore various caves. And they said that Bonne is still a really unique and interesting site. And they say it's absolutely worth everyone checking out, even though it does not actually require a cave certification. All of these areas are large enough that they're considered caverns. So they're not considered an overhead environment that requires any sort of special scuba certification to go visit. Another place with really, really great visibility for freshwater is Fortune Pond up in Michigan. I was lucky enough to go up there this summer on a camping trip. It doesn't look like much. It's kind of just a little hole in the ground when you arrive is what it looks like, but underwater, the visibility is great. And you can see these little zebra mussels. You can watch them filter feeding. They come out of their shells. It's really cool. I would say if you are interested in getting a dry suit certification, do it before you go here. I dove this in a 7mm and was a 7mm wetsuit, excuse me, and was very cold. That's the thickest wetsuit that basically exists. So it's chilly, especially if you go deep enough, but it's a pretty cool place to see. And the deepest portion of this quarry, or yeah, old quarry, is actually beyond the recreational diving limits. It's 210 feet. So it's an interesting site to go and check out. But one of the most popular destinations in all of the Midwest for scuba diving is the shipwrecks that are located in the Great Lakes. There are estimated to be at least 6,000 wrecks in the Great Lakes cumulatively, about 1,500 of which are thought to be in Lake Michigan. Most of their locations are unknown, but Lake Michigan does have dozens of wrecks that are diveable, and more are being discovered regularly. The wrecks in the Great Lakes also tend to be way better preserved than wrecks that you would see in the ocean because of the fresh water and how cold the Great Lakes are. It essentially acts like a refrigerator to preserve these wrecks in really pristine condition. There are a few wrecks that are diveable from way up north in Wisconsin. On the left here, sorry, with a wetsuit specifically. I'm trying to focus more on open water certified places. So on the left here is the SS Eber Ward, which is diveable in the Straits of Mackinac. And on the right is Prince William V out of Milwaukee. There are many other wrecks in northern Lake Michigan and Lake Superior, but as I was alluding to earlier, the further north you go, the more you're going to very likely want to use a dry suit for these dives rather than a wetsuit. So I'm not going to highlight any more of those wrecks today. But thankfully, there are lots of wrecks near the Chicago and Northwest Indiana area that are diveable with just a wetsuit. They are in relatively warm water and pretty accessible for open water certified divers. On the left here, we have the SS Louisville and the Buccaneer. And on the far right, we have a ferry that used to service the Straits of Mackinac. These dives are at about 50 to 70 feet. So they're normally reserved for people with some intermediate experience, not normally people doing their very first lake dive. But with a few lake dives under your belt, you could go explore these places. And then the two middle photos here are the Wells Burt and the Material Services Barge. And both of those are in about 30 or 40 feet of water. So they're great for new and open water divers. And there are some more wrecks at that level as well, but these are the ones that I had photos of to show you guys today. In addition, there is a brand new, newly discovered mystery shipwreck in the Chicago area. The location of this can't be disclosed quite yet as researchers are still mapping it out, but it sounds like within the next year, Double Action Dive Charters is planning to start taking customers out to see it. This wreck was discovered 2 years ago by Captain Nicole. She found the wreck on her sonar display. Basically, on one of their dive days, the site that they had planned to go dive at had really poor visibility. So they decided to go to a different location. And on the way, she noticed a distinctive shadow on her sonar instruments and marked the spot for them to come back to and check out. I talked to one of our resident underwater archaeologists, and she said that they're pretty certain that this ship is a merchant schooner, which was carrying cargo to Chicago. And built in the late 1800s. The way they can tell the age of the ship roughly is by these curved beams here in this bottom photo. These are called framing timbers, and they have different patterns depending on the age of the ship. And she says that most likely this ship looked very similar to the sketch on the left here. There are some really remarkable things about this ship, other than the fact that it's just been newly discovered. It has really good preservation of the anchor, which is still intact with the windlass, which is the crank that they use to raise and lower the anchors. And the steering unit and captain's wheel are also still intact. Apparently finding the captain's wheel intact like this is very rare. So everyone that has talked about this shipwreck and actually gotten to see it is extremely excited about this find. Their biggest goal right now with this shipwreck is preservation and documentation, trying to find out its backstory before opening it up to recreational divers. And a little bit of a note about processing items from shipwrecks from Kelsey as well. She says that if they decide that they need to remove items for museum work or anything like that, they have to undergo a process of electrolysis to stabilize the items, or it will basically fall apart when it's exposed to air. So on the left here, you can see a submarine that's actually undergoing electrolysis in a giant tank. And depending on the size of the item, this process can take a really long time. She said the submarine is going to take upwards of a year to finish this process. In this photo on the top right, you can see a keel that has undergone stabilization and a cannon on the bottom right as well. So I hope by now that I've convinced you that there are a lot of reasons that scuba diving is really cool and a lot of ways that people can use diving in their personal lives and in their careers. And to wrap things up, I wanted to spend a little bit of time telling you about the nonprofit that I helped found in 2020, the Chicago Undersea Explorers Society, or CUES. We're a group of divers and friends who are excited and hoping to cultivate a community of diverse and underwater adventurers. Our mission on the slide here is fostering curiosity, camaraderie, and diversity through underwater education and exploration. And what this means in practice is opening SCUBA through free or at-cost discover dives and certifications to groups that have historically been excluded and underserved in the diving community. In addition, we are hoping to create a diverse space where everyone can find role models in the SCUBA community. To this end, we've been establishing a working relationship with the Windy City SEALs, the Chicago branch of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. And given that we launched in the middle of a pandemic, we had to curtail our expectations a little bit in terms of in-person offerings, but we still had a very successful launch season. We certified 9 open water students in very small classes at Hague Quarry. We did 2 dry suit certifications and certified 2 new instructors. We also grew in 2020 from 11 to 59 members, including 21 dive professionals, so either dive masters or instructors. And at the end of 2020, we were able to offer 2 scholarships after a successful Giving Tuesday fundraising campaign. And we actually have more funding available for scholarships. So if anyone here is interested in getting a scuba scholarship or knows someone who might be, please do go check out our website. We will be opening up, or we are always accepting applications, but we'll be opening up classes in the summer. So you may have to travel up to Chicago if you don't live nearby, but we would love to have you. And our plans for the coming year, in addition to continuing to certify more divers, are to launch a youth dive club. Part of this will be modular classes, basically where students can earn patches or certifications. And our first one is going to be Great Lakes Diver, where students in the classroom will learn about wrecks and talk with a boat captain. And then in the pool, they will practice skills for low visibility diving, improving their buoyancy, and descending on a line. And then they can also go on an optional charter in summer to see some of those wrecks in person that I was discussing earlier in this presentation. Future ideas for this particular program include photography, tech diving, intro to scientific diving, and conservation. We're also planning 2 separate youth camps this summer, basically where students will come and either get open water or advanced certifications in 1 intensive week of diving work. Outside of our work with youth, we've also started hosting some virtual speaker and movie events given the pandemic. And actually this Saturday, we're hosting a screening of 2 documentaries about diving with a purpose. This was a group that was founded by divers from the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. And their goal is focusing on the protection, documentation, and interpretation of African slave trade shipwrecks and the maritime history and culture of African Americans. I've already seen one of these short documentaries and it was absolutely fantastic. So if you are interested in this, I would recommend coming to check it out. It's going to be completely free with just a suggested donation, and we're giving all of the money to Diving with a Purpose. So it's sort of just an educational event. We've also been hosting a lot of things for our membership in terms of community building, including trivia and online games. And beyond the nonprofit efforts, we are also just a dive club and community who enjoy diving together and going on trips when it's safe. Our Slack channel, if anyone doesn't know what Slack is, it's a computer application, basically like messaging. It's completely open and free for anyone to join, as long as they agree to follow our community guidelines on harassment and bullying. So even if you're not certified, but you're interested in meeting people and learning a little bit about diving, feel free to drop us a line and get involved. And if you or anyone you know, again, is interested in applying for scholarships, please do check that out as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening today. And if we have time, answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Katie. It was very cool. I like listening to you talk about that stuff, even though I personally don't like deep water. So if anybody if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to put them into the chat or to unmute and ask them yourself. There is one question in the chat right now from Danielle, and she said, you mentioned a special certification or training for underwater photography. Is this more for improving your photographic skills, or is there a requirement for this training before taking photos underwater?
Yeah, good question. It's definitely more for improving your skills. There's no limit on like being able to take a camera underwater. You do need a special camera with special housing to prevent it from getting damaged with pressure. But yeah, the photography classes are just for improving skills and making sure that you can take good photos. Yeah, I've tried a little bit and I'm not great at it so far, but I haven't taken the class. So.
Okay. And another question, how do you find the difficulty of diving in the Great Lakes versus the ocean besides the cold?
Yeah, they can be kind of similar in terms of things like getting seasick. The Great Lakes do have a lot of waves, unfortunately, if the weather is at all windy. The other main consideration is basically the effects of salt water on your buoyancy. You have to wear more weight when you're diving in the ocean because you're more buoyant in salt water. I haven't done much diving as far as ocean that involves currents. So that's another consideration, is if you are in an area with a lot of current, that can be like a safety hazard. Yeah, I would say overall there's just more safety hazards potentially in the ocean than there are on the Great Lakes.
Okay, and John asks, what is the most interesting and or surprising experience you've had diving?
That's a good question. I probably would say during my rescue class, we had a group of folks that really liked to make rescue classes as interesting as possible. And I had someone actually turn their own tank off while they were doing the rescue class. They told their buddy that their tank was going to be off, so there wasn't actually any danger to them, but it freaked me out. Yeah.
What about your recreational diving?
Recreational diving, definitely when I saw a lemon shark. That we were told that there might be sharks on that dive, but I was sort of like tootling along, looking at fish on the floor, and just glanced up, and there was a shark kind of swimming towards us. It wasn't super close, that we were not in any danger, but it was just suddenly there when I looked up, and that was really cool. And surprising.
Where was that?
That was in Jupiter, Florida.
Calvin asks how expensive it is to get trained.
Yeah, that actually can be variable as well. Up here in Chicago, I think it's about $500 to get the open water certification, but different places will mark things up differently. So I think depending on your area, it might actually be cheaper. Chicago is very expensive as far as SCUBA certifications.
And Elizabeth asks how they can join your Slack channel.
Oh, yeah. If you go to divecues.org, there's a link to fill out the paperwork about agreeing to our like harassment and bullying policy. It's pretty short, but I forget exactly what you have to click on when you get to our website, but I can pull it up and see really quickly here.
And if they're interested in going to your documentary showing this Saturday, how would they do that?
Yeah. The documentary showing, I think right now, is listed only on our Instagram. It was something we decided to do a little bit last minute, but you can also send me an email, and I'd be happy to get you that information.
Do you want to put your email in the chat?
Yeah. That's my personal email.
Does anybody else have any questions? Or anything else you want to add, Katie?
Thank you guys for having me. This is really fun to prepare. I haven't given an official talk about SCUBA. I've given a lot of scientific talks, but this one was fun.
Yeah, I really liked your presentation.
Thanks.
All right, if there are no more questions, we would like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And before you go, I wanted to mention a couple of upcoming events for RiverWatch. Our next final speaker, winter speaker series will be on March 10th at 7 p.m., where the NGREC education staff will be talking about our stream discovery program, which connects students to the RiverWatch program. And then also tomorrow, we are very excited to have a one-in-a-kind Zoom event, an evening with Dion Thomas, the voice of Illini basketball. Tickets for this chance to meet an Illinois basketball legend are $25, and all proceeds support Illinois RiverWatch. And you can learn more about these events and future activities on our webpage or on our Facebook page. All right, thank you, Katie, and everybody else for watching.